last couple of years.
Yeah, I'm sure mine has too.
So.
I haven't been in for a while.
Yeah. And are you on bifocals?
No, not yet. They told me last time that's the next step.
Yeah.
And I haven't been back for a couple of years, so.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had the no lines, and they're making the reader part a little stronger.
Yeah.
She said, because I said I felt like it needed to be a little stronger. So that's just what you were logging in for, was my eye vision, my eye prescription update.
Today we talk about John's optometrist.
Yep.
Probably not.
No. Well, good morning. So we've heard feedback. We want to make sure we're talking louder, so the Zoom voice is back, maybe. So we're going to try and talk louder. We did not get a question from this week on generosity or giving, which, anyway, that will be a sidebar. We're not going to talk about that. But last week we talked about unity. And last week we had someone ask us a question, and we kind of responded to that question. And it's someone who doesn't live here. They're connected to our church. So I sent them the link to the YouTube video where we cross-post this on YouTube. And then they responded back with another question. And last week, Joe and I talked about unity, and we talked about communion, and how can we demonstrate, I think kind of the question was, how can we demonstrate the values of communion in any meal we have? And
Okay.
Are all of our meals communion? Are they not? Like, that was kind of the big picture. And Joe said something like I'm looking at the question and remembering, Joe said something like, if our meals have like a focus on Jesus and kingdom life, then we can incorporate communion into any meal. That was kind of like the big picture ending, because the way we practice communion with the little wafer that tastes like styrofoam and the juice, like the early church would not recognize that. Like, that's fair to say. I'm assuming you do.
And by recognize, you mean if they walked in the room and saw us doing that, their question would be, what are you doing?
Yes.
It wouldn't be an immediate, oh, they're taking communion.
Right.
You're not saying they would walk into the room and say, you guys are doing that wrong. That's not the official appropriate way of doing communion. When you say recognize,
yep.
Or do you think they would say that's not the appropriate way?
I think, I think...
Is there an appropriate way?
Yeah, maybe they wouldn't say that, but I think they would be bewildered. I think if someone from the early church walked into our building at 10:15 on Sunday, at almost any point of what we do, they would be bewildered.
Because we live in a very different world, and
right.
We've developed different systems to do what we and they were brought together to do.
Yeah. And so one of the words that we've used, I know that I've used it a number of times. The word is context, and I'm actually going to take some time. This Sunday to explain what we mean by that. And I mean, I'm sure I started that sentence off the way I didn't want to. I know that there are other pastors and preachers that you probably pay attention to.
Sure.
And there are other pastors and preachers that I pay attention to. So like each week, I have kind of a system each week of what I look at throughout the week. And this past week, the primary person that I pay the most attention to talked about context. Like he said, he basically was like, do you know what I mean by context? This is what I mean. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to do that on Sunday next week, because we say that word a lot, and I know what it means. You know what it means. I think some of the people watching may know what it means, but there's probably a lot of people that may not know what that means.
I think it's good to clarify.
Yeah.
Going to give us some context for your use of the word context.
Yes.
It's a good idea.
So I'm not going to do that today. But yeah, so anyway, so this is a build up to this other question, believe it or not. Someone walking into our building on Sunday morning, if time travel were possible, someone coming from the church at Corinth strolling into our room on Sunday morning would be bewildered. And
Sure.
that's probably a minor.
What are you guys doing?
Yeah. So then coming out of all of that, their question was a thought. When we are in fellowship in a meal together, shouldn't our focus always be on Jesus and our shared kingdom life, intentionally as part of our fellowship always? So the way I'm kind of interpreting this question is, whenever we have a meal together, like shouldn't we always be thinking about Jesus? Shouldn't we always be thinking about the way that we are as Christians? Like, shouldn't Jesus always be the forefront of everything that we do, especially when we have a meal? And we talked a little bit about this before, so.
Yeah, I would say when we are together with other believers, whether we're eating a meal or not, our focus should be on Christ. And if we are alone and not with other believers, our focus should be on Christ. But I don't know that means we turn every time we bump into somebody at the grocery store into a Bible study, or every meal is a sermon recap. I think we have to find that. We have to find a way to take the tension of daily living and spiritual focus beyond the day. We have to take that tension and create something with it that is both leading us spiritually toward where God is leading us and connecting the people around us in that day-to-day living with Him. So you had a question or a thought?
So then, it's not we either talk. When I was in Bible college way back when, when I was in Bible college the first time, there were two words that were used a lot, and they both began with S, and they both had a vowel immediately following the S. There was sacred, and there was secular. And the way that I understood what was being presented by that was, some things are sacred, meaning there's a holy direct connection to God, and then some things are secular, where that's not about anything that God has. So there's a sacred and a secular. So people, the way that manifested itself a lot when I was in Bible college was, do you listen to secular music?
Right.
As though that, so that's there's this separation between sacred things and secular things. And everything was very sharply drawn.
And even, I think, sucked into those two categories, everything spiritual against everything not spiritual. So there's sacred, spiritual, and there's secular, physical maybe, and even dividing the spiritual from the physical as a part of that division of the sacred and the secular.
Yeah.
Secular has its focus on this world. Sacred has its focus on the next world, maybe, or the spiritual world. I don't think that's really a biblical distinction to make. In fact, if we take it too far, we take it the wrong direction, it's a very anti-biblical, anti-scriptural outlook, because God calls us to a whole life and a whole way of living. Even back into the book of Deuteronomy, when Moses gathers everybody together and they began what we don't so much, but even contemporary Jews today still repeat the Shema, which was what Jesus repeated as the greatest commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and strength. But in the context that Moses painted for that commandment, there was a picture of a holistic life. Repeat this to your kids when you are walking down the road, when you sit down to eat, when you're putting them to bed, when you get up in the morning. Write this stuff on your doorposts. This idea of loving God with everything you are and everything you have and every possibility you have, that was an all-encompassing way of living. There was no division between the God-focused part and the rest of my life. Whether I'm sitting down to watch
just say it. The National Football Championship. College football, just say it.
Man, Alabama has a good football team.
Yeah, they do. They have a good football team. Alabama is good.
Whether I'm sitting down to watch football or I'm sitting in the sanctuary waiting for a service to start, or I'm sitting in Taco John's with my family, my living in that moment should be about God and reflecting Him to the world around me, putting His image on display. That doesn't always happen just because I open a Bible and read it to my kids. It doesn't always happen just because I say, so what did you hear in the sermon today? That doesn't mean that's not a good thing to do, but I think we need to be careful of dividing the physical and spiritual in ways that God never intended those things to be divided.
Yeah.
We are not just a physical carcass that's carrying around a spirit for 70 or 80 years until our spirit gets to go home. We are a whole physical and spiritual being connected with other physical and spiritual beings who are also made in the image of God. And our conversations with each other, even if we sit down and talk about football, I think the joy that we might feel as we celebrate a football win, that can be a reflection of the image of God in us. We also can warp that pretty severely if we're not careful and worship the wrong things. And when we do that, that does not reflect God at all or His image. But I think we need to be really careful with that division between the sacred and secular that you mentioned. Yeah.
Well, and when we last year, when we finished out that what turned out to be a year-long series on the church at Ephesus, when we read through 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, that idea that you were just talking about of my body's a carcass, and what really matters is the spirit inside.
Yeah.
And when I physically die, like when the bad physical part of me goes away, the spirit, which is good, is going to ascend. that's exactly the thing that an early version. We talked about Gnosticism a lot during those 3 books, and that's exactly what that is. Like, if I can stay away from the secular and focus my life on the spiritual, then like I'll be good. If I just stay away from all of the bad stuff. Well, then you get into the big long debate, like, well, tell me what bad is. Like, some secular music was bad, but because other secular music maybe had a spiritual message, like I could baptize that secular music and make it be more spiritual because they were talking about spiritual things. And that division, like sometimes it's okay. Like last night, like I watched the college football playoff with someone from Westway Christian Church, invited me to their house to watch the college football playoff. And he also invited some people that he works with. He invited some people that he works out with, and invited actually someone else from Westway. And here's the thing, like, we watched the football game last night. We ate way more food than I ever eat at 8 o'clock at night. And we didn't talk about Jesus like one single time.
You didn't have Bible study at halftime?
We did not have Bible study at halftime. No, we did not. No, that's nice. That's nice little dig there. No, we did not. We did not do the Bible study halftime show. But I think we can still reflect the reality of who Jesus is to one another without doing that.
Yeah.
And I think, like, there was a period of time where when I would watch college football, like, depending on the outcome of what a 21-year-old did with a leather ball, like, that could ruin my day, or that could elevate me to incredible heights. I think if I'm watching a football game, and everyone knew that I was a pastor because, like, I introduced myself, they asked me what I did. If we were watching that game last night when the better team really started winning the game, like, if I started getting angry and, throwing stuff around or taking my hat off and, this is so, like, that would be a really lousy representation of who Jesus is.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, like, I know people that are like that. And it's not just sports. Think about politics. How upset do the things around, like, how do we reflect the realities of Christ in our day-to-day? And if it's a sacred secular thing, like, my relationship with Jesus has nothing to do with the way I vote or the way I celebrate a win or loss on a sports team. And that's where things start to go sideways.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. And I think that's an important question right now, that in that political realm,
yeah,
we need to make sure that our eyes are fixed on Christ, not on our party or our favorite candidate or even events surrounding them. Some of us need to learn how to take a loss in a way that reflects Christ, who, by the way, gave up everything,
right,
and set his rights as God aside and humbled himself and became one of us.
Even if it's there's this line I'm really trying hard to walk right now. Even if it's a fair loss or an unfair loss, like, we have to figure out how to deal with that, because, like, if we want to talk about unfair losses,
how many times did Jesus say, "Hey, this is not fair"?
Right.
They've stolen my life. Well, they did
right.
unfairly steal his life.
Right.
Except he said, "No one steals my life. I give it freely."
Right. Right.
That's the example that
Yeah.
we are called to follow.
Yeah.
That's the God that we are called to reflect to the world. That's the kind of love that we should be putting on full display.
Right.
Because that's the kind of love that our world, our nation, our towns, our neighbors desperately need to see right now.
Right.
And they might see that if we sit down and pray with our families at a meal. But they will see that if we love them the way that he has called us to
Right.
love them.
Right.
They might not accept that and decide to follow him. That's their prerogative to do because
Right.
we've been given free will by a God who wants us to choose to love him. Our responsibility is not to make them love him. Our responsibility is to make sure that the people around us can see God as clearly as possible so that they can choose to obey or reject God as he really is, not as he's been painted by whatever their experiences have been inaccurately.
Right.
We need to show him accurately.
Yeah.
So to kind of swing back to this question, should our conversations, I guess that's not quite how the question was worded, but
It was like shouldn't our focus when we're in a fellowship and a meal together, shouldn't our focus always be on Jesus and our shared kingdom life?
yes.
And yes. And I was thinking, I remember sometime, so I want to say last year, but it wasn't in 2020, it was in 2019. So again, like, aren't we glad we can say last year about 2020? At some point in 2019, the year before last, I remember Pastor Shane shared something on his Facebook page about a comment from someone that he knows who lives in Scottsbluff, or he knew who lived in Scottsbluff, who was a server at a restaurant. And she talked about how she hated working on Sundays because all of the, and we talked about this on a Sunday after that, because all of the Christians would come from church and they would be rude, nasty, and they like never tipped well, and it was just like they hated working on Sunday because of the experience that they had. Not with all, right? We can stereotype. Not with all Christians, but probably a lot. We'll just say a lot. It may not be many, it may not be most, but it's probably a lot. And like, what's the more powerful testimony? Is it sitting around praying before a meal and then treating my wait staff like garbage? Or is it treating my wait staff with respect and love and kindness and mercy?
Yeah.
Like, what's the more powerful witness? Well, we talked about Jesus. They should have, figured out that we're Christians and we're honoring God. But there's a way to come to church on Sunday and not have it be about your relationship with Christ. And we've talked about this. You can do all the right things and not be in a relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, sometimes it's easy to slide into going through the motions.
Right.
And we want to make sure that we're not just going through the motions, but we're actually being transformed by God.
Right.
Who can fix what we've broken inside us so that people can see his image clearly. And that may be as simple as a grace-driven interaction with your server and a big tip to hit on generosity a little bit. Because we're talking about generosity in a Sunday morning context, our
Right.
mind might immediately go to, what am I going to put in the offering plate? But the truth is, generosity goes far beyond Sunday morning. And I would even say the generosity that is going to make a most identifiable mark on people that we know is not going to be the Sunday morning generosity. We should have that.
Right.
But one of the ways we love people around us can be our generous attitude toward them, whether that's money or time or whatever resources we might have at our disposal. One of the ways that we love God is by loving the people who bear his image. Well, guess what people don't bear his image? None of them.
Right.
All of us.
Right.
And all of them, whoever we want to divide those two camps into, have the image of God stamped within us. Sometimes that image gets really covered up with the junk of life.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still there. And one of the challenges that we face as Christians, I think, is to look and sometimes sift through the murk that is covering that up and recognize the image of God in people and love them despite what's covering that up.
Right.
And often that ends in us being able to help them find the way to have that filth removed.
Yeah.
And that murk cleared up so that we can see the image of God clearly in them as well. Because that's what they're here for, even if they don't know it.
Right. And this is all, like, we're not going to go 30 minutes today. Like, this is a perfect lead up to what we're going to talk about on Sunday. Like, how do we love other people, and what does it look like for us to be a church that loves other people? And how do we navigate that space? And sometimes love will look like having a Bible study with them and telling them, I would say a lot of times love looks like telling them about Jesus. And a lot of times love might and can look like, let's get together and let's just watch football. Like, can I just get together and watch Avengers with somebody?
Yeah, again, this is not an either or proposition.
Yeah.
We're called to love God and display him and talk about him when we get up and when we lay down and when we eat and when we're sitting around talking, when we're sitting around watching football. And there is not a time when we're supposed to not be focused on Christ.
Yeah, when you were talking about that Deuteronomy 6 text, he repeat these words, and I think Moses is doing two things. I think he's saying repeat these words. So when he says talk about this when you're on I think he's saying love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And he's saying be a faithful follower of Yahweh when you're on the road, when you're waking up, when you're going down. So it's not just this is not a command of, well, if I just tell my kids repeat this phrase at these 4 times during the day and I write them on my door frame, like I'm being obedient to God. No, that's the either or. Right.
And I think for Moses, there was no separation between words and actions. Yeah. I think for us, there should be no separation between words and actions. Yeah. We should say what we mean.
Right.
And we should do what we say. Mm-hmm. And I think we just have that propensity to excuse our actions.
Right.
And when they don't match up with what we state is our ideal, instead of adjusting our actions, we just kind of put them on different planes and say, this one exists here and this one exists here. And again, I think that misses the whole life that God has called us into. Jesus came so that we could live fully, not live partially here and partially over here. He wants every aspect of our lives to be filled with him. And full, not just cluttered, if that makes any sense. Like my desk is cluttered because there's lots of piles of different things stacked here and there.
I live in that same space.
And that's not the full that our lives should be reflecting. Our lives should be reflecting a fullness that comes from a consistent focus that is
So you don't have a sacred pile and a secular pile. Sunday's not a sacred day, and
right.
that's my church day.
Yep. Right.
That's when I wear my church clothes, and I get all dressed up for church, because for some reason, like, that's the more sacred day.
Yeah.
And the rest of the day, it's not church day. Why would I dress up? Because it's
Right.
not church day.
I just got my regular shoes on, not my nice shoes.
Well, I do that. Why do you have to get personal?
Because that was the example that happened this week. Somebody said, "Oh, you look really nice today," and I looked at what I had on, and I had on jeans and a shirt, and it was a shirt that didn't have a hood on it, so maybe that was a little different. Because for some reason, I have a lot of shirts with hoods. I don't know why. But then I looked, and I had nice shoes on because I got some new shoes for my birthday a few months ago, and I was like, it must be the shoes.
I definitely have church shoes. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna be on the Preachers and Sneakers Instagram account anytime soon, but I definitely have church shoes. And not anyway. Okay. Hopefully this all makes sense.
Probably did until we started talking about shoes.
Yeah. Hopefully this all makes sense. So, bottom line, we always want to be an accurate representation of who Jesus is. Whether we are specifically talking about him, intentionally talking about him, or whether I am hanging out with friends watching a college football game. Even if Jesus' name is never mentioned, I can still accurately represent who Jesus is.
Yeah. And that doesn't give us an excuse to not ever explicitly display Christ,
right,
or talk about him specifically. It doesn't mean I just have to show him. I don't have to explain. I don't have to tell about him. I think the Christian life is show and tell.
Yeah.
And both of those pieces are integral to other people coming to understand who God really is and how he loves them, which is what they're created for. Mm-hmm. So we have to do both.
Yeah. So thanks for watching. This coming Sunday, we're going to talk about what it looks like for us to be a pro-love community. We're going to be talking about, so I don't know, I'm sorry I'm doing this, but there are going to be 3 points. We're going to talk about love commanded, love explained, and then love demonstrated. And I never saw myself as a 3-point guy, and I don't know why I'm doing it, but that's what we're going to talk about: love commanded, love explained, and love demonstrated. And I'm looking forward to it.
I hope the illustrations are good.
Me too. Although it'll just be from the Bible. So, all right, we love you guys, and we will. Thanks for watching. We'll see you just over the course of the next few days and over the next week. So have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you soon.
See you later.
Bye.